There's a moment that happens in almost every growing trucking company, usually somewhere between 20 and 60 trucks, where an owner looks at a new system that someone is suggesting, a detention policy, a hiring checklist, maybe a maintenance schedule. And their first thought is, that's not us. Not that won't work. Just that's not how we do things. And underneath that is usually something deeper. Something like, we're not the kind of company that needs rules for everything. We treat people like people. We're flexible. We figure it out. And here's the thing, that instinct isn't wrong. It's just from an earlier chapter of your business. Because what worked at 10 trucks, that flexibility, that personal touch, that ability to handle every situation individually, starts to work against you at 40 trucks. Not because flexibility is bad, but because at scale, it stops being flexibility and starts becoming chaos. Welcome back to Driven for Success, the podcast for owners and executives of mid-sized trucking fleets who want fewer headaches, better drivers, cleaner systems, and a whole lot less chaos in their business. I'm your host, Mike Ritzema, owner of Superior Trucking Payroll Service, where our mission is simple: help trucking families. Over the last few episodes, we've talked about what breaks first as fleets grow, and how to tell the difference between real growth and just being busier, and what owners need to stop doing in order to scale. When you're running 10 trucks, you know everything, every driver, every load, every crazy little customer quirk. And when a situation comes up that doesn't fit the normal pattern, you just handle it. You use your judgment, you make it work. That was what helped your company be successful. And it feels good. It feels like you're being thoughtful, like you're treating people as individuals and not numbers. But then, because of that success, you grow. And now you're at 40 trucks and you're trying to figure out how to handle situations individually, still making custom decisions, still being the person who figures it all out. Except now there are more situations, more questions, and more exceptions. And what used to feel like good leadership starts to feel exhausting. For example, your payroll person comes to you with a detention question. Then the driver calls about a pay issue. Every single one of these requires you to stop what you're doing, think about the situation at hand, and make a decision. And here's the part that wears you out. You've probably made that exact decision before, maybe a dozen times this month. But because there's no system, because there's no documented standard, you have to make it again and again, and it never stops. That's what inconsistency costs you. Not money, not at least at first. It costs you mental energy. And mental energy is the thing you can least afford to waste when you're growing a business. So someone, yeah, maybe a consultant, maybe a business coach, maybe a friend who just runs a bigger fleet, suggests you need systems, and you try. You sit and write down a detention policy or a hiring standard, and immediately it just feels wrong. It feels too rigid, too black and white, too corporate, because what you're writing down doesn't have room for gray areas. It doesn't account for the driver who's usually great but had one bad week. And so you think to yourself, this isn't how we do things. We're not that kind of company. But here's what's actually happening in that moment. You're not rejecting the system because it's bad. You're rejecting it requires you to let go of something that it's been working for you. It's what made you successful. It's your ability to be the person who handles everything, who makes exceptions, and who figures it out. And that's hard because that's been your strength. It's what got you from 3 trucks and 5 trucks to 25 trucks in the first place. But now it's what's keeping you stuck all the time. Because at some point, and for most trucking companies, it's usually around 25 to 40 trucks, the business gets too big for you to make every decision individually. There are too many situations, there are too many people, too many moving parts for you to be on top of every single one of them. And when you try to maintain that same level of personal involvement, one of two things happens. Either the business slows down because everything has to go through you for a decision, or the business gets inconsistent. because different people make different decisions and nobody really knows what the standard is at all. Both of those hurt you. So, what does this have to do with systems feeling rigid? Well, everything. Because a system, by definition, removes options. It says, here's the standard, here's how we do this. Not case by case, but every time. Think about that for a minute. The system builds it for you every single time. And where you're used to using your judgment for everything, that feels restrictive. Feels like a weight on your chest. But here's the reframe that you should take with you. A system isn't taking away your judgment. It's just documenting it so that other people will use the same judgment that you make. You're not removing your ability to make good decisions. You're just making the decision once clearly so that everyone can apply it without having to interrupt you. Let's walk through an example of this. Let's say you've been handling detention pay case by case. Detention pay is a nice, easy, clean example, so that's why I like it. Driver sat for 3 hours, you pay him. That's the new standard, right? 3 hours is what you generally do. 2.5 hours, maybe. It depends on the situation. And in your head, there's logic to all of this. You know which situations matter and which ones don't. You know which shippers are more likely to have detention and which ones you might just have to wait. You know all that stuff. But your payroll person or your dispatcher, they don't have that context. So they come to you every single time. Now imagine you write a policy. Drivers get paid detention after 3 hours, no exceptions unless proved by a manager for documented extenuating circumstances. At first, that feels too rigid. What do we do with a driver who sat for 2 hours and 45 minutes? But here's what you're missing. Those questions are always going to come up. The only question is whether you're going to answer them every single time or whether you're going to answer them once and move on. And yeah, that means some situations that used to get handled with a phone call are now handled by the rule. But you know what else happened? Your payroll person stops interrupting you 6 times a week with detention questions. They also get their payroll out sooner, which is a payroll person I really like. Your driver stops being confused about when they'll get paid and what they'll get paid and do they get paid that detention or not. Your customers stop getting inconsistent answers, about their own detention because they have a rule for you, so it should be the same way. And you get your mental energy back to focus on things that actually matter, like finding better customers, improving driver retention, planning for next year, making equipment purchases, things like that. That's the trade. You're trading off the ability to handle every situation individually. And in return, you get clarity, speed, and capacity. For a lot of owners, that trade feels uncomfortable because it requires admitting what got you here won't get you there. And that's a big deal because when you started your business, you said yes to everything and you figured it out. And you just, through the just determination and belief that you could do it. And you did. But now we're in a different place. And now we've got to be more organized. So I know in my business, that's happened for me. When I started the business, it was just me and I did everything. And then I brought people on and I would give them tasks and they would do them. But for a long time, I was still only the person making decisions. And yeah, it's going to exhaust you. I'll tell you, you've got to be able to write rules out. You've got to be able to give people structure. And what happened was my business became not scalable because I couldn't do anything I wanted to do because I knew there were strategic things that needed to be done, forward planning that needed to be done. But I couldn't do it because I couldn't concentrate because every 5 minutes somebody was in my office asking me a question. And it was often the same question that I felt like I answered last week. And it's not because they were wrong. It's because they wanted to make sure that because I didn't give them a clear direction the last time, they want to make sure that they did it right. They were just trying to take care of the customer. Oh boy. Yeah, that was exhausting. So here's a question I want you to sit with. Where in your business are you still trying to be the system? And it's not because you're a control freak, not because you don't trust people, but because you haven't taken the time to write down what the standard should be. And sometimes you haven't thought about very concretely what you think the standard should be and you just apply it case by case. Are we talking about things like pay decisions? Are we talking about schedule exceptions? Are we talking about pricing? Whatever it is, it's taking up more mental energy than you realize. It's probably slowing your business down more than you realize. Because every time someone has to come to you for an answer, it's time you're not spending on strategy. It's time you're not spending on things that only you can do as the owner. And those are, that's setting up how the company's going to succeed. It's time you can't go find a new customer if you're the only salesperson yet. It's time you can't make sure that the drivers have what they need. Here's the part that surprises people. When you actually sit down and write out the system, when you document what the standard is and what the exceptions are, it's not as rigid as you thought it would be because you're the one writing it and you're the one deciding what matters and what doesn't. The rigidity you worried about, that's not the system. That's the unfamiliarity of doing something different. And after a few weeks, something very interesting happens. The system stops feeling rigid. It just starts feeling like the way things work. Your team stops asking questions because they already know the answer. Your drivers stop being confused because the rules are clear. Clarity is a underrated silver bullet, by the way. Clarity is what makes everything go. And you stop being exhausted because you're not redeciding the same things over and over. That's what good systems do. They feel rigid until they don't. And then they just feel like clarity. So if you're sitting there right now thinking, yeah, but my trucking business is different. We can't just have one rule for anything. Yeah, I hear that. I get you. But complexity is exactly why you need systems. Because when you try and handle complexity through individual decisions, you just multiply that mental load that you're carrying. When you build systems, you handle that complexity one time. And then you only have to think about the truly unusual cases. That's not rigidity. That's efficiency. I'm not here to tell you what systems to build or how to build them. You already know your business better than anybody else ever could. I'm just here to point out what might be happening to help you see the weight that you're carrying and that you don't have to carry anymore. Because somewhere between 25 and 60 trucks, the business changes. It stops being something you can hold together through effort and brute force and instinct, even though that served you well before. It starts being something that needs a functional, purposeful design. And that design, it's not about being corporate or bureaucratic or impersonal. It's about getting clear about how you want things to work, writing it down and letting that clarity do all that heavy lifting for you. In the next episode, we're going to talk about one system every growing fleet needs first and why owners start in the wrong place. Until then, you don't need to fix anything yet. Just notice where you're redeciding things you've already decided. I'll see you next time.